By 2035 now, all of those gas utilities are bound to, by regulation now, to reduce their emissions 41% by 2035, so in a decade. And sort of the sneaky, not so sneaky part of that, the only way that they're going to be able to do that, to meet that target, which we've talked about here, is to force people off the system, to get rid of at least a substantial chunk of their customer base. There's just no other way that you're going to do almost half of your emissions without getting rid of all of those customers who are currently using natural gas. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of PowerGab, your go-to show for all things energy and environmental policy here in the state of Colorado. I'm Jake Fogleman, joined as always by my co-host Amy Cooke. And to start us off this week, we want to just do a brief update on something that just came down from the PUC. It's actually going to be a PUC-heavy show, a little bit of foreshadowing for you folks. But this one has to do with something we just recently touched on a previous episode, and that is the Comanche 2 coal plant that was slated to close at the end of this year. And then because of, frankly, needing to keep the lights on, Xcel and the Polis administration and a bunch of state officials came to the PUC and asked that retirement be delayed by at least a year. And as of this week, the PUC has officially approved delaying that retirement for that year. And there's a write-up in the Colorado Sun from Mark Jaffe that we'll drop in the show notes so people can get the gist of what happened. But Amy, you actually sat in on the hearing and listened to the commissioners deliberate over this and how they ultimately came down to keep this open.
Yeah, I did. I like we say many times on the show, we listen to this stuff so you do not have to. So I did listen to the deliberations among Commissioner Plant, Commissioner Gilman, and Chairman Blank. All three agreed to keep Comanche 2 open for another year, so they did get that. There were questions about cost recovery, and I think those will play out. That there is some reporting that is required by Xcel. They will have to have, I think it's monthly, if I remember correctly, monthly reports on the status of 3, how much is it costing, and then there were some questions around the economics, really, of just keeping them open at all. So I thought that was kind of interesting. They're like, well, if it's so expensive to fix 3, and we don't even know what the cost is, there was speculation. Why, maybe it's keeping it open is not the answer. But ultimately, in the end, they decided keep Comanche 2 open for another year. And then, of course, keep working on Comanche 3 with the anticipation that Comanche 3 will come back online by mid-summer. But here was the interesting thing, Jake, when I was listening to it, was there was a split decision. There was a 2-to-1 decision, and this gets to some of the comments that we have made about Chairman Blank, in that we think he sees what we see, and he has some concerns. Because I'm going to read a line from, this is on the PUC's website, and this is after they have issued the order, and it says, this is late yesterday, the commission approved the variance to extend the retirement date for Comanche 2 to the end of 2026. Additionally, the commission found that the outage at Comanche 3 was the sole justification for the extension of Comanche 2. And they ordered substantial monthly reporting. And here's the other one, but they don't, but they're missing some important stuff on it. And they ordered operational limitations consistent with the proposal from Western Resource Advocates, the Conservation Coalition, and the Environmental Justice Coalition. And then they say a written decision is expected soon. But what they don't say on that is that operational limitations was a 2-to-1 vote. That's where Commissioner Blank disagreed with, Chairman Blank disagreed with Commissioner Plant and Gilman, who want the operational limitations that Western Resource Advocates, the Conservation Coalition, And the Environmental Justice Coalition suggested that's the alternate plan. And that's the one that the two commissioners approved. Blank has instructed that there should be a footnote that says he was opposed to it. And the reason he said economics, he said that we don't know exactly what the need is going to be. And he made the comment when that settlement agreement was made was 2018, and the world was a very, very different place. Colorado was a very different place. So to me, reading between the lines there, he's concerned about the very thing that we have been talking about here, which is will we have enough capacity and accredited capacity to keep the lights on? Clearly, Gilman and Plant are not that they are not concerned about that at all. They are more concerned with shutting down coal than they are with keeping the lights on. So that split is something that we have talked about on the show a number of times. We really think that Eric Blank is seeing reliability issues, and go to the website and look at the paper that Ethan wrote, our intern Ethan Cornell wrote, which shows that the numbers for Excel go negative next year, and that is accredited capacity versus, and that includes reserve margin versus possible peak demand. It's the numbers don't lie, and it's just math. But Gilman and Plant are much more concerned with making sure coal closes, and said, well, the 2018 settlement says it should only operate at 60%. So therefore, we shouldn't be able to use Comanche 3 at its full capacity and 2 at its full capacity, and certainly not at the same time.
That is a fascinating, the upshot, of course, is that Comanche 2 does get a stay of execution, which is the right decision. But the internal
100%.
dynamics behind that are absolutely fascinating. And like you said, it's a trend that I think we've been one of the first to really highlight it. The fact that Eric Blank is becoming increasingly, PUC chair Eric Blank has been increasingly uncomfortable with some of the major decisions the PUC is making. He's very clearly taking a bigger picture look at the so-called energy transition and the costs involved, the reliability risks involved, and saying, I think it's just self-evidently true that the world is a completely different place since 2018, and we have unprecedented load growth on the horizon from data centers and electrification, and you name it. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to put restrictions on the few reliable baseload plants we have left on the system in that world.
And he's much more prudent. He's less ideological. He's looking at economics in total. And also, I'd mentioned this too, this move to decarbonize Colorado. Let's just make clear, and we've said it before, it will have virtually zero impact on global carbon emissions. Colorado could go back to the 11th century, and it would have no impact on global carbon emissions. We're just too small. Although the 11th, who knows what they were burning in the 11th century. I will say this though. The recent decision that we're about to highlight with the clean heat plan, I just keep wondering if our emissions are going to go up. Are they going to increase?
Yeah. Well, you teased it there. The other big PUC decision we want to talk about this week also fits the trend because PUC Chair Eric Blank was also a dissenter in this decision. But this, of course, has to do with the clean heat plan that we've talked about this previously on the show. This stems from a 2021 piece of legislation from the Colorado General Assembly. It was the first of its kind when it was passed, and it was designed to force gas distribution utilities, so think the gas big monopolies like Xcel, Black Hills, Atmos, and the like, to start reducing their greenhouse gas emissions on their system. And it started at 22% by 2030 was the deadline that was actually codified in statute, and sort of left the rest to the PUC to hash out at a later date. And we talked about earlier this year, the Polis administration came to them and requested a rulemaking and said that they thought that the new target should be a 41% reduction by 2035. So almost double the emissions reductions on an even shorter timeline than when that law was passed was their proposal. We filed comments. I think we talked about the comments we filed here on a previous episode of PowerGab. Now we finally have the commission's final decision on what to do. And it's worth noting, by the way, that, obviously part of our comments and not just us, the utilities, the labor unions, even the utility consumer advocate all came out and said that this is a little too aggressive. This doesn't consider costs properly. We urge the commission to reconsider and take cost in mind and maybe adjust that target to something more modest and practical. And even the Polis administration, to their credit, later came back and said, okay, what about 31% instead of 41%? And they said that that was much more feasible and achievable. Turns out that, to your point, Commissioners Gilman and Plant disregarded that as well because they stuck to their guns and went to the much stricter 41% target and established that as their decision. So by 2035 now, all of those gas utilities are bound to, by regulation now, to reduce their emissions 41% by 2035, so in a decade. And sort of the sneaky, not so sneaky part of that, the only way that they're going to be able to do that, to meet that target, which we've talked about here, is to force people off the system, to get rid of at least a substantial chunk of their customer base. There's just no other way that you're going to do almost half of your emissions without getting rid of all of those customers who are currently using natural gas. And so we'll have to see, obviously, when the utilities get to the point where they file their individual plans laying out their strategy. But you can count on the fact that this is going to raise rates. You, the gas customer of this utilities, are going to have to pay more on your electric bills to fund what they call beneficial electrification programs, which I despise that term, but that's the nature of it. And it's going to be, what it means is essentially subsidies for folks to rip out their gas furnace, install a heat pump and redo the wiring and the panel on their house so they can use electric heat going forward. And that's how we're going to comply with this regulation that the PUC just set forth.
Yeah, this decision is, it's a disaster. It's just it's an absolute disaster for a number of reasons, which you just highlighted. And I want to highlight just a couple of more things about that. Those of us who converted wood-burning fireplaces to natural gas, gone. Your hot water heater, gone. Natural gas, your dryer, your furnace, your stove. And you think about what the cost is to do that, replace all those appliances, and then you have to get an electrician out there to put 220 outlets in place where you had a natural gas, where you had a natural gas line. Your natural gas, if you had a house built specifically with a natural gas insert fireplace, you can't convert that to wood. You can't go burning wood in that. The way some of us who are in older homes, by the way, I will be burning wood. I will be burning wood in my what was once a natural gas fireplace. Now, we were told to convert to natural gas because it was cleaner, but now we're being told we can't use it. So I will be burning wood, mark my words on that. But so I'll increase my emissions, and I'm fine with that. I don't care. But here's personal choice is gone.
Yep.
In this. And I don't even know if there is a ballot measure that could fix it. I think you'd have to actually repeal that bill. And then you would have to repeal the 100% decarbonization by 2050. That's the bill that has to go.
I'm glad you brought that up. Sorry to cut you off, but I forgot to. It's very important. That's another thing that they did is they went above and beyond what the underlying statute required in this decision, right? Because the statute, it didn't give a target for 2035, but it said the commission has to come up with something by 2035. But that's it. That's the only thing it said. Nevertheless, they decided the 41% target, but again, 2-to-1 decision, Plant and Gilman decided, well, we're not going to I know we're not supposed to codify future targets, and we're not going to officially do it, but we're going to do a de facto 100% reduction in emissions by 2050. And they cited the broader carbon goals of the state as their justification for doing so. And so they said it is reasonable for the commission to conclude that Colorado's statutory goal for 2050 corresponds to a 100% greenhouse gas reduction target for gas utility clean heat planning. So basically putting the utilities on notice that, yeah, we're going to say we're not formally setting that as a target, but you better believe that that's what we're going to hold you to. And what that means for folks is an entire phase out of gas use by 2050.
And by the way, it isn't just us saying that. that Michael Booth from the Colorado Sun, this is the headline. PUC finalizes plans to push natural gas out of Colorado home heating to hit 100% decarbonization. But it's not just home heating, is it?
Right.
It's like it is. You're not going to be able to use your dryer.
Right.
You're not going to be able to use your, I guess, it's home heating and cooking and your hot water heater, certainly your furnace, fireplace, all of that, it's going to be gone. And it's not, I love this. It's insidious how they've done it. They'll say, we're not taking away your choice. We're just going to make the utilities
Right.
liable for anything above 100% reduction. If they can't reduce 100% of their carbon emissions by 2050, we're going to hold them liable or accountable for that. So that means essentially by 2050, they will cut off all natural gas service. That's the only way to do this. So you have utilities like Atmos, which is only a natural gas provider, will be out of business in Colorado, and you will have Black Hills, which provides natural gas down in the southeastern Colorado. That portion of their bit will be gone, and then people like me who have Atmos will be forced onto Xcel. And by the way, a couple of things: electricity, powering your or heating your home with electricity is far more expensive, so it's going to cost you more for sure. That's number one. Number two, when you look at reliability, natural gas on home heating is far more reliable than your power. You experience many more power outages. Well, I think the outage of natural gas, if I remember correctly, I think that the statistic I saw was once in a decade. That might be the outage you would experience with natural gas.
Right.
Whereas with electricity, just think about the number of outages you had this year.
Right.
So the unreliability and the cost will be astronomical on both sides. But here's the other thing. This is the thing that bothers me. I think it's a takings on against the utilities for sure, because you're essentially forcing them to commit economic suicide. But it is also it absolutely obliterates private property rights for residential and business ratepayers. So I have to get rid of my natural gas fireplaces. I have to get rid of my natural gas furnace. I have to get rid of my natural gas hot water heater. And I don't get compensated for that. In fact, I have to pay for it. Then I have to pay for the infrastructure that for the beneficial electrification, and I may have to subsidize my neighbors. So it obliterates private property rights. It gets rid of consumer choice. And here's the other thing, and I think this is really important. I don't know that this is a constitutional issue, but it sure as heck is a social contract issue. To me, this destroys the social contract between the Public Utilities Commission and the ratepayers they are supposed to protect.
Yep.
In fact, they are so ideological that they are beholden to Western Resource Advocates, Environmental Justice Coalition, and the Conservation Coalition. So the environmental NGOs, with their bad math and bad science, that's who 2 out of these 3 commissioners are beholden to or seem to be taking orders from. And they have absolutely destroyed the trust and the relationship between commissioners and the people whom they should be representing.
Yeah, I thought it was telling that the only real sort of celebratory reaction you saw in the aftermath of this decision was from the Sierra Club, put out a gigantic press release with Southwest Energy Efficiency Project, the SWEEP group. Oh, yeah. They signed on to it as well, basically saying like, wow, we commend the commission for holding the line and bucking the Polis administration and bucking the business groups and all these other groups that wanted us to care about economics. Yeah, get rid of them. Yeah. Thank God that these commissioners held the line on strict climate goals. That was exactly the reaction you saw from those environmental NGOs. And I want to touch on the fact that you call this insidious, because I think that is so spot on. It's the state sets that forth a mandate, but says we're going to leave it to you, utility. You're on the hook for making it a reality. Oh, and by the way, you, the captive ratepayer, are going to finance that policy. So it's just state mandates at a distance. We get to wipe our hands clean. We're setting the target, but we're going to leave it to the utility to take money from captive ratepayers to make it a reality. Consumer choice be damned. I did a blog post analysis of this. Folks want a little deeper dive into this decision, and we'll drop it in the show notes. But your point, once again, about natural gas being cheaper than electricity is spot on. Every couple of years, I run these numbers just because this is a perennial issue in Colorado. And I ran the most recent annual data from the EIA about the average cost for residential electricity use versus the average cost for natural gas use delivered to households. It's still about 4 times cheaper to get natural gas delivered to your home. And so even if you get the most super efficient heat pump out there, which may be more efficient than a gas furnace, that doesn't leave you out ahead financially. And I even dropped a study, which I think is fabulous because everyone on that side of the aisle loves NREL, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, or I forget what Trump just renamed it, something else just this week. But before that, they loved
the National Lab of the Rocky Mountains, or I think that's of the Rocky Mountain States, or National Laboratory of the Rockies.
Well, the artist formerly known as NREL put out a study last year, crunching the numbers essentially of what the cash flow would look like for folks that are currently heated by natural gas. If they switch to a heat pump, would they come out ahead? And they did it by state, which I love. And they showed that in Colorado, only a very small minority, 22% of households would come out ahead if they got the most cheap, minimal efficient heat pump. But if you switch to a high efficiency cold climate heat pump, which is what you need in Colorado, it's a Rocky Mountain state. We get frigid winters. Just this week, we got a big snowstorm, right? They literally found that 0% of households would come out ahead financially by making that switch from their current affordable natural gas heating to a nice state-of-the-art, super efficient cold climate heat pump. And that's because electricity is more expensive. It costs tens of thousands of dollars to retrofit your home to install that heat pump and make it operational. And so that is what is being, you're not only having to pay more on your utility bill to set up a program that's going to incentivize people to make that switch. When people actually do make that switch, they end up losing out financially. So it's all insidious. I think that's the perfect word for what the PUC decided.
And I just want you to think about this. We are totally abandoning a perfectly functional infrastructure on natural gas.
Yep.
We're just abandoning it. We're tossing it aside, saying we're just not going to use it. Why? Because you have a handful of people who are beholden to the environmental left or who are captive by the environmental left. And this movement towards total electrification, it's insane. It's nuts. And the way they're forcing utilities to commit suicide.
Yep.
And holding a gun to their head so that and saying a proverbial gun, so that they have to then force ratepayers to convert all of our infrastructure, perfectly usable, paid for in many cases. Talk about stranded assets, infrastructure to heat our homes in the winter. And then, of course, we'll go to a winter peaking system, meaning demand in winter will go higher.
Yep.
We'll be using a less reliable resource. Everything about it is insane. It's just, it's totally nuts.
I'm glad you brought that up because I know we're coming up on time, so I don't want to belabor the point too much, but that ties into the first story we talked about, right? On the electricity side, we're so worried about resource adequacy that even the progressive left is willing to forestall coal plant retirements. And that's the exact system that we want to foist, literally almost 70% of the state onto that system that's already hanging by a thread. What do you think is going to happen when conditions get tight and it's a really cold winter storm like we had just this week, and people are putting strain on that electric grid, even running their super efficient green heat pumps? That still is going to add a whole lot of demand on that grid that's already under stress. It's already having generational load growth. That's a recipe for disaster. I don't think people fathom how much potential energy is stored in the gas distribution system, and converting that to electrons is not a simple, small feat. And commissioners that underestimate the challenges ahead do so at their peril. And unfortunately, I think ratepayers also are going to bear the brunt of those decisions.
I want to be I want to be one of the lead authors on the history of the PUC when it is written, and talking about how Plant and Gilman, these two people, these two commissioners, are going to be. I want their legacy to be the destruction of 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 generation in Colorado, the destruction of reliable power in Colorado. And to your point about electrons and throwing the significant portion of Colorado into an unreliable system, a system that we're currently worried about the very reliability of it, that we're extending the giving a stay of execution to a coal-fired plant in a state that hates coal. They are getting rid of any backup. So we won't have the, meaning natural gas, right? They're getting rid of, we won't have redundancies in the system. There will be no redundancy. And I think about this because when I was in North Carolina, a gasoline pipeline went down and there's no redundancy in that system. We were out of gas. I would just want people to wrap your minds around. Think about this. 75% of that state was didn't have access to gas. There was no gas. We were out of gasoline for over 2 weeks. How long can you live without a backup system? So we are throwing all of our power needs into one generation system, one infrastructure, and it's going to be the transfer of electrons. And we're totally just getting rid of a usable working natural gas infrastructure. Why? Because they just don't like it.
Yep. You're absolutely right. We're sleepwalking into an affordability crisis. We're sleepwalking our way into a reliability crisis, and it's all for ideological reasons. And I just want people to grasp that. Like I said, I'll drop the analysis in the show notes. It's very wonky. You folks will have to bear with me to try to explain this stuff because it's 5-year-old legislation that leads to multiple rulemakings, and it's arcane PUC stuff that we talk about all the time. But this stuff really matters. It's going to play out over the next few years. You're going to see your rates go up, and people need to understand why that's happening, who made the decision, and who ultimately to hold responsible for when the bill comes due and potentially the lights go out. So as we're coming up on time here, Amy, do you have any takeaways for our listeners on either of the stories we talked about?
I do. One, read Jake's post, and we'll make sure that it's going to be in the show notes, but you really need to read it. It's well written, and it will explain, it lays everything out beautifully. It's not hard to understand. So make sure you read that post so that you can sort of get what we're talking about. That's number one. Number two, I can't overstate the fact that we have two commissioners who are driven by ideology. I would say 100% of the time. They are captive of the environmental left, and that is Commissioner Plant and Commissioner Gilman. Commissioner Blank, even though he was the executive director at one point of Western Resource Advocates, at least sees the economics. He seems to see what we see, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. And I'm going to throw one more thing into this PUC, this split, and what is happening at the PUC. I think there are going to be lawsuits. I just don't think this one's going to. I don't think this is one that all the utilities are just going to accept, and I don't think ratepayers will accept it. I don't think they'll accept being forced to change their appliances and everything else. So you have two, and it's all because we have two commissioners that are ideologically driven. So that's number two. That was a long one. Three, get a generator. You're going to need it. And I suggest get a gasoline one. Just let's keep our carbon footprint going. And then, because you're going to need it when the power goes out in the winter, and the only system of heat you have is electrons coming into your home, and there's a power line down in a winter storm. You won't have access to natural gas, but make sure you have a generator, and make sure you have a couple of them, and make sure they're petroleum fired so that you don't have to worry about charging a battery of some kind.
Yeah, if they're going to take away redundancy, you got to supply your own redundancy. So
Right.
you heard it
Firm
here,
your own
folks.
grid.
That's right. But that does it for us on another episode here of PowerGab. If folks like what they saw, they can head over to powergab.org to check out our entire back catalog. We produce new episodes every week. We're also available wherever you get your audio shows, whether that's Spotify or Apple Podcasts. And if you'd like to reach out to us to suggest future show topics or guests you'd like to see us interview here on the show, you can send those our way at info@powergab.org. We always love hearing from you guys. But until next week, we'll see you.